Don't start that engine, please.
A 19-year-old black kid in oil-stained coveralls shouting at a man who made 10 times his salary. Craig Belmont turned around, looked him up and down.
Who let this kid onto my runway? Get him out now.
Sir, the fuel coupling on the left engine is cracked. If you fire that turbine, it blows.
A janitor is going to teach me about mechanical turbines?
I'm serious. That coupling won't hold.
One more word, and you're back on the streets permanently.
Security dragged Darnell behind the cordon.
Just before RC ignition, Sentinel 4. Fire it up.
10 seconds. Every alarm on that tarmac screamed at once, and what no one standing there knew yet was that Belmont's arrogance didn't just blow an engine that day. It nearly killed every person on that flight line. But before that tarmac, before the alarms, before Craig Belmont's career went up in smoke right next to his precious engine, there was a kid with a badge that said "Temp" in red letters and nothing else. Darnell Tucker arrived at AeroCore Dynamics on a Monday morning in early March. The sky was gray. The parking lot was full of German sedans and pickup trucks with company stickers. He came on a city bus. AeroCore sat on 40 acres outside Baltimore, a mid-tier aerospace defense contractor with one golden ticket, a $120 million contract with the Department of Defense to build the Sentinel 4, a next-generation unmanned reconnaissance drone, the kind of machine that could fly for 18 hours straight, photograph a license plate from 40,000 feet, and land itself without a human touching the controls. The company had been working on it for 3 years. They were 8 weeks from the most important flight test of the program. If the Sentinel 4 performed, the DoD would greenlight full production. If it didn't, AeroCore would lose the contract, and probably half its workforce. That was the world Darnell walked into. He didn't walk in through the engineering entrance. He walked in through the service door around back. The workforce development program placed him as a temporary maintenance worker, the lowest position on the floor. His job was simple: sweep the hangar, haul parts from storage, empty the waste bins, stay out of the way. His badge had no department, no title, just his name, his photo, and that red word, temp, like a warning label. The hangar itself was enormous, a cathedral of metal and fluorescent light. Half-assembled airframes hung from ceiling rigs. Pneumatic tools whined and echoed off concrete walls. The air smelled like hydraulic fluid and burnt coffee. And in this cathedral, there was a very clear hierarchy. Engineers wore pressed polos and ID lanyards. Technicians wore gray jumpsuits with name patches. And at the very bottom, maintenance staff wore whatever they had, plus a high-vis vest that marked them as invisible. Darnell was the only black person on the hangar floor. He didn't complain. He showed up 10 minutes early every shift. He swept clean. He hauled fast. And during his lunch breaks, while everyone else scrolled their phones in the break room, he sat alone near the airframe bay with a small pocket notebook and sketched. Engine diagrams, cross-sections of turbine housings, fuel flow schematics drawn from memory. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. Nobody except Craig Belmont. Belmont had been senior flight engineer at AeroCore for 18 years. He had degrees framed on his office wall, commendations from 3 different defense contractors, a parking spot with his name stenciled on the concrete. He ran the Sentinel 4 program like a kingdom. His engineers were loyal because he rewarded loyalty and crushed everything else. He was loud, he was territorial, and he treated anyone below engineer rank like furniture. But with Darnell, it was different. Sharper, more personal. It started small, first week. Darnell was mopping near the main whiteboard during a team briefing. Belmont stopped mid-sentence, stared at him. "Can you mop quieter? Some of us actually went to school." A few engineers laughed. Darnell said nothing, kept mopping. Second week. Darnell left his notebook on a workbench during a bathroom break. When he came back, Belmont was holding it open in front of 2 junior engineers, flipping through pages of detailed turbine sketches and fuel system diagrams. "Look at this," Belmont said, grinning. "Our janitor thinks he's an engineer." He turned to Darnell. "What is this, kindergarten homework?" He tossed the notebook into the waste bin. The two engineers looked uncomfortable but said nothing. That night, Rena Moore, a junior technician and one of the few people at AeroCorps who treated Darnell like a human being, fished the notebook out of the trash. She found Darnell in the parking lot waiting for his bus. "He had no right to do that," she said, handing it back. Darnell took the notebook, wiped it on his coveralls. "It's fine." "It's not fine." Darnell looked at her. "The notebook's fine, that's all that matters." Third week. Belmont was walking a group of Pentagon evaluators through the hangar, showing off the Sentinel-4, talking thrust-to-weight ratios and stealth geometry, the full show. Darnell was hauling a bin of metal scraps across the floor. Belmont saw him and didn't miss a beat. He leaned toward one of the officers and said loud enough for half the hangar to hear, "Don't worry, that one's not on the program. We keep him around for the heavy lifting. It's the only thing that doesn't require reading." The officer said nothing, just kept walking. Darnell kept hauling. But that same week, during a night shift when the hangar was nearly empty, Darnell did something no one knew about. He was cleaning near the Sentinel-4's left engine nacelle when he noticed it. A hairline stress fracture on the fuel line coupling of the intake manifold. Almost invisible. You'd have to be 6 inches from the metal and know exactly what you were looking for. Darnell knew what he was looking for. He opened his notebook, sketched the coupling, noted the fracture length, the location, the direction of the stress pattern. He wrote one word underneath: dangerous. The next morning, he filled out a maintenance concern form, the official channel. He described the fracture, the coupling number, the location on the airframe. He submitted it to the shift supervisor. Nothing happened. 3 days later, he tried again, this time verbally through Rena. She believed him. She escalated it to Belmont's office. Belmont didn't even read the form. He glanced at the name on top and pushed it aside. "A janitor is writing maintenance reports now? File it in the trash where it belongs." Rena pushed back. "Craig, he's describing a specific coupling failure. At least have someone look at it. I've got 40 engineers on this floor. If there was a crack, one of them would have found it. End of discussion." 1 week later, the DoD accelerated the flight test by 2 full weeks. Political pressure from a Pentagon review board. The Sentinel-4 had to fly, ready or not. Belmont's team scrambled, 16-hour shifts, rushed inspections, shortcuts that got buried under paperwork. And that fuel coupling, the one Darnell flagged, sat exactly where it was. Cracked, leaking, waiting. 2 open loops now hung over this story like a blade. The first was mechanical, a cracked coupling under stress in an engine about to be pushed to full power. A ticking clock that no one with authority would acknowledge. The second was human, a kid who saw the truth and was punished for speaking it. How long would Darnell be invisible before someone, anyone, saw what he carried inside? What Belmont didn't know was that the janitor he just humiliated could strip a turbine engine blindfolded. But that part of the story doesn't start in a hangar. It starts in a 1-car garage in East Baltimore, with a grandfather who believed an engine could teach a boy everything the world refused to. Gil Tucker's garage smelled like motor oil, brake dust, and black coffee that had been sitting on the warmer since dawn. It was a 1-car garage on a dead-end street in East Baltimore. The roof leaked when it rained. The floor was cracked concrete stained with 30 years of grease. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling on a wire that probably violated every building code in the state. But to an 8-year-old Darnell Tucker, it was the most important room in the world. Gil Tucker, his grandfather, had built this place with his own hands when he came home from Korea in 1953. He'd served as an aircraft mechanic aboard the USS Oriskany, one of a handful of black men the Navy allowed to touch fighter engines during the war. He was good, better than good. His crew chief once said Gil could hear a piston misfire from across the flight deck in a thunderstorm. He could feel a vibration 2 frequencies off normal just by resting his palm on the engine casing. He could diagnose a fault by smell alone. burnt insulation versus overheated bearing grease versus leaking hydraulic fluid. Each one had a signature. Gil knew them all. When he came home, he applied to every aircraft maintenance company on the East Coast. Douglas, Lockheed, Pratt & Whitney, Boeing. Every single one turned him down, not because of his record, not because of his skill, because of his skin. So Gil opened a repair shop. Not aircraft engines, he couldn't get near those anymore. Car engines, lawnmower engines, boat motors. Anything the neighborhood needed fixed, Gil fixed it. For 35 years, that garage never closed. And the walls told the story. Hand-drawn diagrams covered every surface. Fuel injection systems, ignition timing charts, compression ratio tables. Not printed, drawn. By Gil's hand. In pencil and ink, with notes in the margins that read like poetry written by a man who loved machines the way some people love music. On one wall, above the workbench, hung a framed photograph. Gil in his Navy uniform, young, proud, standing on the deck of the Oriskany with grease on his collar and a wrench in his back pocket. That was the room where Darnell learned everything. Gil's teaching method was simple and brutal. He would take an engine, didn't matter what kind, and sabotage it. 3 faults, hidden, sometimes obvious, sometimes almost invisible. Then he'd set the engine on the bench, hand Darnell a flashlight, and say 5 words. Find all 3, then eat. Darnell was 8 the first time. It took him 4 hours. He cried twice. Gil didn't help, didn't give hints, just sat in his chair, drank his coffee, and waited. Darnell found all 3. By the time he was 12, he could find them in under 30 minutes. By 15, he was finding faults Gil didn't even plant. Real wear patterns, early-stage corrosion, stress marks that would become cracks 6 months down the line. Gil would shake his head and laugh. Boy, you're seeing things before they happen. That's not mechanics, that's prophecy. But the most important thing Gil ever taught Darnell wasn't a technique. It was a sentence. 7 words that became the foundation of everything Darnell believed about himself and the world. An engine doesn't care what color your hands are. It only knows if you're lying. Gil said it every time the world pushed back. Every time a customer questioned whether a black mechanic could really fix a German car. Every time some kid from the neighborhood told Darnell that Grease Monkey was a dead-end life. An engine doesn't care. It only knows. That was the motto, the compass, the thing Darnell held on to when everything else fell apart. And everything did fall apart. Gil died on a Tuesday afternoon in September. Darnell was 16. He came home from school and found his grandmother sitting on the porch, still in her church dress, holding Gil's reading glasses in both hands. Massive stroke, gone before the ambulance arrived. Gil left Darnell 3 things. The notebook, filled with decades of hand-drawn diagrams and technical notes. A set of precision tools wrapped in a leather roll. And a letter. Darnell kept the letter folded in his wallet. He never told anyone what it said. But some nights, alone in his room, he would take it out and read it until the words blurred. After Gil died, the garage closed. Darnell's mother worked double shifts at a nursing home and still couldn't cover rent. College was never even a conversation. There was no fund, no savings, no plan. The workforce development program found Darnell 2 years later. They offered a placement at Aerocore Dynamics, temporary maintenance worker, minimum wage. Darnell didn't take the job because he dreamed of sweeping hangars. He took it because it put him close to engines again. And being close to engines was the only place where Gil was still alive. Every night before sleep, Darnell opened the notebook to the last page Gil ever wrote on. He traced the pencil lines with his fingertip. The diagrams were fading, but the words underneath were still clear. An engine doesn't care, it only knows. The morning of the flight test, the sky over Aerocore Dynamics was cloudless, perfect flying weather, the kind of day that made engineers smile and executives shake hands early. By 7 a.m., the tarmac was already full. Pentagon observers in dress uniforms, DoD program managers with clipboards, Howard Price, AeroCorps CEO, in a charcoal suit he probably bought just for this occasion. He moved through the crowd like a man running for office. Firm handshakes, confident nods, the smile of someone who had staked his entire company on the next 2 hours. The Sentinel-4 sat on the runway like a predator waiting to be unleashed. Matte gray skin, angular stealth geometry, twin turbine engines that could push the drone to 400 knots at altitude. $60 million of engineering, ambition, and shortcuts, though only one person on that airfield knew about the shortcuts. Darnell had been assigned to perimeter cleanup. His job that morning was to keep the observation area tidy. Empty water bottles, straighten chairs, stay invisible. He hadn't slept. Not because of nerves, because of the coupling. 3 weeks had passed since he filed the maintenance report. 3 weeks since Belmont threw it away without reading it. 3 weeks since Rena escalated it and got shut down. And in those 3 weeks, Darnell had watched the Sentinel-4 go through final assembly, final checks, final sign-offs, all with a cracked fuel coupling sitting 6 inches from the hottest part of the left engine. He thought about going over Belmont's head, straight to Price, straight to the FAA. But he was a temp, a janitor. He had no email access, no credentials, no voice. So he did the only thing he could. He showed up, and he watched. At 8:15, the ground crew began the pre-flight sequence. Fuel lines were pressurized. Avionics were booted. The flight control team ran through their checklist from a mobile station 50 yards from the aircraft. Darnell was collecting trash near the perimeter fence when the tow vehicle pulled the Sentinel-4 into final position. And for the first time in 3 weeks, he saw the left engine nacelle up close. His stomach dropped. The fracture had grown. What had been a hairline crack 3 weeks ago was now a visible stress line running across the coupling seam. And at the base of the coupling, where it mated with the intake manifold, there was something new, a faint rainbow sheen on the metal surface. Fuel. Micro seepage. The coupling was already leaking under static pressure. Darnell knew what that meant. If they spooled that engine to full power, the coupling wouldn't just crack. It would rupture. Hot fuel would atomize directly into the turbine's hot section. And at that point, the only thing standing between the tarmac and a fireball would be the automatic suppression system, if it worked fast enough. And if it didn't, there were 40 people standing within 100 feet of that engine. He didn't think. He moved. He dropped the trash bag, stepped over the safety cordon, walked straight toward the aircraft with the kind of calm that only comes from absolute certainty. Security saw him immediately. 2 guards moved to intercept. Darnell raised his voice, not screaming, not panicking. Clear and loud, aimed directly at Belmont, who stood near the mobile control station with a headset around his neck. "Don't start that engine. The fuel coupling on the left intake manifold is compromised. You've got a stage 2 seep." Every head on the tarmac turned. Belmont's reaction was instant. Not concern, not curiosity, annoyance. What followed was the scene that opened this story. The insults, the dismissal, the laughter, security dragging a 19-year-old kid away from an aircraft he was trying to save, and then the ignition, and then the alarms. When the fire suppression system activated, a wall of white chemical foam engulfed the left engine in under 3 seconds. The turbine shrieked, sputtered, and died. Emergency shutdown. Red lights spinning across the tarmac, ground crew running, Pentagon officials stepping back with their hands over their ears. The Sentinel-4 sat on the runway, crippled, its left engine buried in foam, smoke curling from the nacelle like a dying breath. And in the middle of the chaos, Craig Belmont stood perfectly still. His headset dangled from one hand. His face was blank. The face of a man watching his entire career evaporate in real time. On the other side of the cordon, Darnell Tucker stood just as still, notebook in his hand. He didn't shout, didn't point, didn't say a word. He just closed his eyes for a moment, like a prayer. Or maybe like a man listening to an engine one last time, hearing exactly what he knew he would hear. Among the Pentagon observers that morning was a woman most people in the crowd didn't recognize. but anyone in the aerospace industry would have known her name in a heartbeat. Vivian Caldwell, 61 years old, retired propulsion engineer, former lead on 3 separate military engine programs. She had helped design the turbine architecture that powered half the Navy's current drone fleet. She was also black, and she had spent the first 15 years of her career being told she didn't belong in rooms full of men who looked nothing like her. Vivian was there as an independent safety consultant. The DoD had hired her specifically because they didn't trust AeroCorps' rushed timeline. Her job was to watch, evaluate, and report. She had watched everything. She saw Darnell cross the cordon. She heard his warning, the precise language, the technical specificity. Stage 2 seep, intake manifold coupling. Not the words of a janitor, the words of someone who understood what he was looking at. She watched Belmont humiliate him. She watched security drag him away. And she watched the engine prove the kid right 10 seconds later. After the fire crews finished and the tarmac was secured, Vivian walked past the crowd, past the engineers, past Belmont, who was now arguing with Price in a voice that carried more panic than authority. She walked straight to Darnell. He was sitting on a concrete barrier behind the cordon, alone, notebook on his knee. "Can I see that?" she asked. Darnell looked up. He hesitated. The last person who touched this notebook had thrown it in the trash. Vivian saw the hesitation. She understood it. "I'm not going to throw it away," she said quietly. "I just want to see what you see." Darnell handed it over. Vivian opened the notebook. She turned pages slowly. Fuel system diagrams drawn with precision that would pass an engineering review. Stress analysis sketches, thermal cycling notes, torque specifications cross-referenced with manufacturer data. She stopped on the page dated 3 weeks ago. The coupling fracture. Drawn, measured, and labeled. With one word at the bottom, dangerous. Vivian looked at Darnell for a long moment. Then she reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a business card, and slipped it between the pages of the notebook before handing it back. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But her eyes said everything. Something had just shifted, and Belmont had no idea what was coming. The Sentinel-4 was grounded. No discussion, no negotiation. The moment that fire suppression system activated on a live tarmac in front of Pentagon officials, AeroCorps dynamics went from showcase mode to damage control. Within 24 hours, the FAA dispatched Nathan Schaefer, a regional safety inspector with 26 years of experience and a reputation for being the kind of man who read every line of every document and remembered all of them. Schaefer didn't smile much. He didn't make small talk. He showed up with a briefcase, a recorder, and the authority to shut down the entire facility if he didn't like what he found. Vivian Caldwell was retained as the independent technical auditor. The DoD wanted their own eyes on this, someone with no loyalty to AeroCorps, no history with Belmont, and no reason to look the other way. Howard Price agreed to everything. He had no choice. The contract was hanging by a thread. One more failure and the DoD would pull the plug, take the Sentinel-4 program to a competitor, and leave AeroCorps bleeding money for the next decade. Then Vivian made a request that turned the entire building upside down. She asked that Darnell Tucker be brought into the diagnostic bay as an observational participant. Belmont nearly lost his mind. He called it a circus. He called it an insult to every credentialed engineer on the floor. He said he would not allow an unqualified maintenance temp anywhere near a restricted diagnostic area. Vivian didn't argue. She simply looked at Price and said, "The unqualified maintenance temp identified the failure your entire engineering team missed. I want him in the room." Price looked at Belmont, looked at Vivian, looked at the Pentagon liaison standing in the corner with his arms crossed. "He's in the room," Price said. Belmont's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. For the first time in 18 years at AeroCorps, Craig Belmont had been overruled. The left engine was pulled from the Sentinel-4 and brought into Diagnostic Bay 2, a clean, bright room with overhead lighting, steel work tables, and enough precision instruments to make a surgeon jealous. The engine sat on a rolling cradle, stripped of its nacelle cover, its guts exposed like a mechanical autopsy. 6 engineers. Schaefer with his recorder, Vivian with her reading glasses, and Darnell standing in the back with his notebook, wearing the same coveralls he always wore, his temp badge still clipped to his chest. Belmont stood at the front of the room, arms crossed. He had already prepared his defense. The coupling failure was a manufacturer defect, he said. He produced the supplier's certification paperwork, batch number, material composition, quality control stamps. All clean. This is a vendor issue, not an AeroCore issue. Schaefer looked at the paperwork, then looked at the coupling, now removed from the engine and sitting on a tray under magnification. Anyone else want to weigh in? Schaefer asked. He wasn't looking at the engineers, he was looking at Darnell. Darnell stepped forward. He didn't ask permission, he just moved to the magnification station and leaned in. 30 seconds of silence. Then he spoke. This isn't a manufacturer defect. These tool marks along the seating surface. See the scoring pattern? That's inconsistent with factory machining. This coupling was installed with a torque specification approximately 15% above the OEM maximum. He opened his notebook to a page of torque charts. His grandfather's charts, cross-referenced with the manufacturer's published spec sheet. Over-torquing at this level causes micro-deformation in the alloy. Under normal conditions, it holds. But with repeated thermal cycling, heating and cooling every time the engine runs, the deformation becomes fatigue. The fatigue becomes a fracture. The fracture becomes a failure. He paused, then added something that wasn't technical at all. My grandfather used to explain it like this. It's like shaking someone's hand too hard every single day for a month. At first, nothing happens. Then one morning, something breaks. The room was silent. Schaefer pulled the installation logs. The coupling had been installed by Belmont's team 6 months ago during a routine maintenance cycle. The torque wrench used for the installation was logged in the tool registry. Its last calibration date was 14 months prior. Industry standard required recalibration every 12 months. The wrench was 3 months overdue. The torque reading it delivered was unreliable, and nobody had caught it, because nobody had checked. This was not a manufacturer defect. This was an in-house installation error compounded by a calibration lapse, both under Craig Belmont's direct supervision. Belmont's face went pale. He opened his mouth to respond, but Schaefer held up one hand without looking at him. We're not done, Schaefer said. Vivian turned to Darnell. The engine's open. Walk me through it, all of it. I want to see your process. Darnell didn't hesitate. He moved around the engine slowly, methodically. His eyes tracked every component the way a doctor scans a body, not looking for one thing, but listening for anything that didn't belong. He stopped at the oil cooling system. This bypass valve, he said, pointing to a small brass component tucked behind the main oil line. It's installed in reverse orientation. One of Belmont's engineers stepped forward. That valve passed the ground test. It's functioning. At low RPM, yes, Darnell said. The flow direction doesn't matter much at idle or ground run speeds. But at sustained cruise thrust, anything above 80% power, the bypass needs to route oil through the secondary cooler before it returns to the main loop. In this orientation, it skips the cooler entirely. The oil temperature will climb past redline within 12 minutes of sustained flight. He picked up a pencil and sketched the correct flow path on a blank page. 2 diagrams side by side. One labeled installed, one labeled correct. The difference was obvious once you saw it. Vivian pulled the OEM engineering drawing from the technical manual. She held it next to Darnell's sketch. They were identical. If the coupling hadn't failed on the ground, Darnell said quietly, the engine would have launched. It would have flown. And somewhere around 12 minutes into cruise, the oil system would have starved. The turbine would have seized mid-flight. He let that sink in. A $60 million drone, falling out of the sky, onto whatever was underneath it. The test range was 6 miles from a residential neighborhood. Rena Moore, standing near the back of the room, covered her mouth with her hand. 2 of Belmont's engineers exchanged a look that carried the weight of a career's worth of doubt. Even Price, watching from the doorway, took a half step backward, as if the implication had physically pushed him. Belmont said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The bypass valve was right there, installed backward, documented in the maintenance log with his team's sign-off. The coupling failure on the tarmac, the one Belmont called a vendor defect, the one that grounded the aircraft and humiliated him in front of the Pentagon, that failure had actually saved the drone. It saved AeroCorps, and it may have saved lives. A catastrophe had prevented a bigger catastrophe, and the only person who saw either one coming was a 19-year-old janitor with a pocket notebook. Schaefer set down his pen. He looked at Darnell the way people look at someone they are quietly recalculating. "Is there anything else?" Darnell opened his notebook to a page dated from 3 weeks earlier. Not the coupling page, a different one, covered in small, dense handwriting and schematic fragments. "I've been reviewing the maintenance logs posted on the shared board, the ones visible from the service corridor. I'm not supposed to access them, but they're posted publicly, and I read them during shift changes." He turned the notebook so Schaefer and Vivian could see. "The calibration issue with the torque wrench isn't isolated. I've tracked at least 4 other tools on the floor with lapsed calibration dates. Same pattern, all overdue by 2 to 5 months. That means every fastener, every coupling, every torque-critical component installed with those tools in the past 6 months is unreliable." He flipped to another page. "And it's not just this airframe. Bay 4 has the backup Sentinel prototype and a training airframe. On Tuesday last week, I walked past the training frame during a floor sweep. The wiring harness on the secondary avionics bay is routed directly alongside the exhaust heat shield. Less than 2 inches of clearance. Standard minimum is 6 inches. At sustained operating temperature, the insulation on those data cables will degrade. Best case, you lose avionics. Worst case, electrical fire at altitude." The room had gone completely still. Nobody was looking at Belmont anymore. They were looking at Darnell. "I can show you," Darnell said. He led Schaefer, Vivian, and 2 of the engineers to Bay 4. They stood in front of the training airframe. Darnell pointed to the wiring harness. It was exactly as he described. Data cables pressed against the heat shield. No thermal barrier. No separation. A failure waiting for enough flight hours to come true. Schaefer photographed it, logged it, then turned to Vivian. "This isn't an incident anymore," he said. "This is a systemic quality control failure. I'm initiating a full safety audit of AeroCorps' maintenance program." He looked at Belmont, who was now standing at the back of the group like a man at his own funeral. "Every airframe, every tool log, every calibration record, everything." Vivian walked back to Darnell. He was standing alone again, notebook closed, eyes fixed on the airframe he had just exposed. She put her hand on his shoulder, just for a moment. "Your grandfather taught you well," she said. Darnell's composure, the same composure that had carried him through every insult, every humiliation, every ignored report, cracked, just for a second. His eyes glistened, his jaw tightened. He nodded once. Then he opened his notebook to a fresh page and started writing. Craig Belmont was a man who had never been wrong. Not publicly, not on record, not in 18 years at AeroCorps Dynamics. He had built his career on certainty, on being the loudest voice in the room and making sure that voice was never questioned. It had worked for almost 2 decades. Managers deferred to him, engineers followed him, and anyone who challenged him learned very quickly that Craig Belmont did not lose arguments. But standing in Diagnostic Bay 2, watching a 19-year-old temp worker dismantle his credibility one revelation at a time, Belmont was running out of room. The coupling failure was his team's fault. The bypass valve was his team's installation. The calibration lapses were under his authority. And now the FAA was about to open every cabinet and every logbook in the building. He had one move left, and he took it. "This is ridiculous," Belmont said. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "We're letting a janitor with a notebook run a federal investigation. He has no degree, no certification, no credentials of any kind. He's a temp worker from a welfare program." He turned to Schaefer. "For all we know, she coached him." He pointed at Vivian. She's been on this tarmac for less than 48 hours and suddenly she's championing some kid who can barely afford a bus pass? This is theater.
Vivian didn't respond.
She didn't need to. She just looked at Schaefer and waited. Schaefer looked at Belmont for a long time. Then he said something that would determine the rest of this story. Fine, let's settle it. He walked to the far end of the diagnostic bay, where a qualification test rig sat under a dust cover. Every aerospace maintenance facility had one. It was a standard turbine engine, not flight grade, but mechanically identical to the real thing, preloaded with 3 deliberate faults. Hidden, varied in difficulty. The test was simple. Find all 3 faults, document them, explain the failure mode and the corrective action for each one. It was the same qualification exercise that certified aerospace mechanics took to earn their credentials. The benchmark time for a fully certified engineer was 90 minutes. Schaefer pulled the dust cover off the rig. He looked at Darnell. Can you do this? The room held its breath. Price was watching from the doorway. Belmont stood with his arms crossed, chin high, the posture of a man who believed he had just set a trap. Every engineer on the floor had stopped working. Word had traveled fast. The janitor was being tested. Darnell looked at the engine. It was a model he recognized, a training variant of the same turbine family Gil had kept in the garage. Older, simpler, but the language was the same. The logic was the same.
He thought about Gil.
The workbench, the bare bulb, the 5 words that had shaped every skill he possessed. Find all 3, then eat. Yes, sir, Darnell said. He took off his high-vis vest, rolled up his sleeves, picked up a flashlight and a wrench from the tool rack. And then he went quiet. The room watched a 19-year-old kid work on an engine with the kind of focus that made time irrelevant. His hands moved with a patience that didn't match his age. Steady, unhurried, deliberate. Every panel he removed, he set aside in order. Every component he inspected, he returned to its exact position before moving on. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He worked the way Gil had taught him, like the engine was a living thing that would tell you everything if you just listened carefully enough. 15 minutes. He found the first fault. A misaligned bearing sleeve on the main shaft, positioned just off-center enough to cause vibration at high RPM, but invisible to a casual inspection. He pulled his notebook out, sketched the misalignment, wrote the fault description, tore the page out and handed it to Schaefer.
28 minutes.
The second fault. A deliberately scored turbine blade on the second stage, a surface scratch designed to simulate foreign object damage. Darnell found it by running his fingertip along each blade edge, eyes closed, feeling for the irregularity the way a blind man reads a sentence. He documented it, handed the page to Schaefer.
39 minutes.
The third fault. This one was buried deeper. A hairline crack in the combustion chamber liner hidden behind the fuel injector array. Most technicians would have needed to pull the injectors to see it. Darnell didn't. He smelled it. A faint trace of carbon buildup in a pattern that didn't match normal combustion. The kind of smell that meant exhaust gas was leaking through a crack too small to see, but large enough to leave a chemical signature. He pointed to the exact location. One of the engineers pulled the injector. The crack was there, right where Darnell said it would be. He wrote the last page, handed it to Schaefer. 39 minutes, 3 faults, 3 explanations. Every one technically flawless. Schaefer compared them to the answer key, the sealed reference sheet that came with every qualification rig. Perfect score. But Darnell wasn't finished. He reassembled the engine. Every panel back in place, every bolt torqued to spec. He set down the wrench, wiped his hands on his coveralls, and stepped back. Schaefer nodded to one of the engineers. Start it. The engineer hit the ignition. The turbine spooled up. Smooth, clean, no vibration, no alarms, no faults. The engine hummed the way an engine is supposed to hum, the sound of something working exactly the way it was designed to work. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Vivian Caldwell started clapping, slow, measured, the way you applaud something you've been waiting a long time to see. Rena Moore joined. Then one of the junior engineers, then another, then the technicians near the door who had been watching through the glass. The sound filled the diagnostic bay. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet, steady sound of people recognizing something they couldn't deny.
Darnell stood next to the engine.
His hands, the same hands that had mopped floors and hauled trash and been mocked for existing, rested at his sides. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just listened to the engine run clean. And in the back of the room, Craig Belmont stared at the floor. He didn't clap. He didn't speak. He didn't move. Because for the first time in 18 years, Craig Belmont had absolutely nothing to say.
If this story has you holding your breath, share it with someone who's ever been told they weren't good enough.
And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because what happened next to Belmont is something you don't want to miss. Nathan Schaefer closed his notebook. He looked at the qualification rig results one more time. Then he looked at Darnell.
For the record,
Schaefer said, I've administered that test to over 200 certified mechanics in my career. The average completion time is 92 minutes. The fastest I've ever seen was 51. He paused. You just did it in 39. He didn't say it with admiration. He said it with the flat, factual tone of a man who documents everything and editorializes nothing. But the weight of it landed on every person in that room.
Schaefer turned to his recorder and dictated a formal note for the FAA incident report.
He cited Darnell Tucker by full name as the individual who identified the original fuel coupling failure, the reversed oil bypass valve, and the systemic calibration lapses across AeroCorps' maintenance program. Every finding, every discovery, attributed to a 19-year-old temporary maintenance worker with no formal certification.
That report would become a federal document.
Permanent, searchable, the kind of thing that follows a name forever, in the best possible way. After the bay cleared, Vivian Caldwell asked Darnell to walk with her. They stepped outside into the late afternoon sun. The tarmac was quiet now. The Sentinel-4 still sat where it had been grounded, foam residue drying on its left engine like a scar. Vivian didn't waste time.
I run a small consulting firm, she said.
Independent Propulsion Diagnostics. I contract with the Navy, the FAA, and 3 private aerospace companies. I have a full apprenticeship program with 1 open slot. She stopped walking and turned to face him.
The slot covers full tuition for your airframe and power plant certification.
Living stipend. Tools provided. And you work alongside me on real contracts while you study. 18 months. When you finish, you'll have your A&P license, federal credentials, and a resume that opens every door in this industry. Darnell didn't respond right away. He looked at the Sentinel-4, then at his hands, then at the notebook in his pocket. Why me? He asked.
Vivian almost smiled.
Because I was you. 40 years ago, I was standing in a room full of men who looked at me the same way Belmont looks at you. Nobody gave me a chance. Somebody eventually did. And it changed everything. She paused. You already have the hands and the eye, Darnell. Let's get you the paper.
Howard Price, meanwhile, had done his own math.
He called Darnell into his office that same evening and offered him a full-time junior technician position at AeroCorps. Better pay, benefits, a real badge, no red temp label. Darnell thanked him, respectfully. Then he declined. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Price, but I think I need to go where I can learn, not just where I can work.
He chose Vivian.
He chose the harder road, the one that led to the kind of career Gil Tucker had been denied his entire life. One more thing happened that day. Rena Moore found Darnell in the parking lot before he left. She handed him a folder. What's this? He asked. Every time Belmont said something to you, every insult, every incident, dates, witnesses, direct quotes. I've been keeping a log since your second week. Darnell held the folder, looked at it, then handed it back.
Keep it safe for me, he said.
But I'd rather let the work speak. Rena took the folder, nodded. It already did. The FAA audit took 3 weeks. Nathan Schaefer and his team went through AeroCorps dynamics the way a surgeon goes through a body looking for cancer. Every logbook,
every tool registry, every calibration certificate, every maintenance sign-off on every airframe in the building. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Craig Belmont had been falsifying calibration records for over 14 months. Not all of them, just enough. A date changed here, a signature added there. Small lies designed to keep the paperwork clean while the tools drifted further and further out of spec. He did it because the schedule demanded it. The Sentinel-4 program was behind from day one. The DoD kept moving deadlines forward. Price kept promising delivery dates that engineering couldn't meet. And Belmont, the man who never admitted he was wrong, solved the problem the only way he knew how. He cut corners and buried the evidence. The calibration lapses affected 11 different tools across 3 maintenance bays. Every torque-critical fastener installed with those tools over the past 14 months was now suspect. The FAA flagged 63 individual components across 4 airframes for immediate reinspection. 63 components. Any one of them could have failed. Any one of them could have brought an aircraft down. Belmont was terminated from AeroCore Dynamics on a Thursday morning. Security escorted him from the building. He carried one box. 18 years of commendations, plaques, and framed degrees, and he left with one box. But the termination was just the beginning. The FAA opened a formal review of Belmont's airframe and power plant certification under 14 CFR Section 65.12, the federal regulation governing fraudulent maintenance documentation. His A&P license was suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Without that license, Craig Belmont could not legally touch an aircraft engine anywhere in the United States. For a man who had built his entire identity on being the smartest person in the room, the suspension was a professional death sentence. Not prison, not violence. Something worse for a man like Belmont: irrelevance. Howard Price didn't escape either. The DoD issued a formal corrective action order against AeroCore Dynamics. The company was fined $1.2 million for systemic maintenance violations. Price was required to issue a public statement acknowledging the failures, not buried in a press release, but read aloud at a DoD contractor review board in front of every competing aerospace firm in the region. His annual bonus was revoked. His stock options were frozen by the board of directors. He kept his job, barely, but the man who had shaken hands so confidently on the morning of the flight test now walked the halls of his own company like a guest who wasn't sure he was still welcome. The Sentinel-4 program was delayed by 9 months, but it survived. Because the failures were caught before anyone died. Not by the quality control system, not by the engineering team, not by 18 years of Craig Belmont's so-called expertise. By a kid with a notebook. There was one more moment worth telling. On his last day at AeroCore, Belmont walked through the parking lot toward his car. Darnell happened to be there, loading his grandfather's tool roll into the trunk of Rena's car. She was giving him a ride to Vivian's workshop for his first day of apprenticeship. Belmont stopped, 10 feet away. The two of them stood in that parking lot, the man who had everything and lost it, and the kid who had nothing and earned it. Belmont opened his mouth. For a second, it looked like he might say something. An apology, an insult, a justification. Something. He didn't. He closed his mouth, looked at the ground, and walked to his car. Darnell watched him go. He didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel anger. He felt something quieter than either of those things, something closer to exhaustion. The kind that comes when you've been carrying a weight so long that the moment it lifts, you don't feel lighter. You just feel everything you were too busy to feel before. He closed the trunk, got in the car, and didn't look back. 6 months later, Darnell Tucker stood at a workbench with his name on the placard. Vivian Caldwell's workshop, Annapolis. Halfway through his A&P certification, top of his cohort. On this morning, he was calibrating a fuel metering unit on a turboshaft engine. Measurements in thousandths of an inch. His hands were steady. They had always been steady. When he finished, he opened his notebook and placed it next to Gil's, side by side. Different handwriting,
different diagrams, same language, same love. 2 notebooks, 2 generations, one conversation that never ended.